and placing it on the website. So if you don't want to be recorded, please turn off your camera, but otherwise feel free to carry on. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the land on which we all gather today. We'd like to pay our respects to elders past and present and extend our respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, acknowledging the First Peoples as the first scientists, educators and healers. So on today's agenda, we have some updates on AUCDI R3. We've recently closed the community review. So we do have a little bit of an update from that and some changes that are happening to developmental milestone summary and adverse reaction risk summary. And then we are looking at a couple of data groups or data elements for AUCDI R4, problem diagnosis, a provisional working diagnosis, as well as a family history. So just a quick, these entry slides that we always have, just a reminder, AUCDI, or the Australian Clinical Data Set for Interoperability, is really specifying what the clinical information is that is needed for data entry, data use and sharing as well to support patient care. And that's what we're doing here in the clinical design group. And over on the technical design side, they're working on the technical specification, so specifying how that set of data that's defined through AUCDI should be structured, accessed and shared between systems. As many of you have come along on this journey, we are just finishing AUCDI R3, which focused on chronic condition management and counter record, as well as a bunch of priority backlog items that were identified by the community. And now we're kind of moving towards R4. We haven't officially started R4, but we have started doing some of the content, which we spoke about at the last meeting and will continue today. And the idea is that AUCDI is a product that we are iteratively growing over time. So we weren't trying to include everything all at once. This is slowly growing as we add additional use cases, starting with core of the core and then moving through over time. Okay, so onto the first agenda item. We had AUCDI R3 out for community review. I think it was open for about 6 weeks and it contained all of the new content that we had added over the last year. As part of that review, we actually received a really large number of comments and issues, which was really amazing. So as you can see from this slide here, we had 32 submissions, but a large proportion of those were group submissions. And some individual submissions. It did produce quite a lot of feedback in the best way possible. And so we are currently working through those comments and issues at the moment, trying to work through them, understand what we need to do within the document, what things we need to make changes on, what further information we need to provide. So that's kind of in progress at the moment. In terms of the spread of stakeholders, we did get quite a lot of government input, which was actually quite amazing to see the breadth. So we had not just from the digital areas of the department, but also from some of the surveillance areas, the particular interests around, I think, smoking and some of those other chronic condition areas, as well as the disability sector. So it was really interesting to see the wide range of government areas that are really interested. So that was really, really great to see. And then there were some from industry, some healthcare providers, software, the clinical peak bodies, and industry bodies as well. So there was a really good spread. In terms of kind of the vote results, for every data group, we asked in the questionnaire whether you accepted as it was. Minor revision, accept, overall accept, but there were minor revision or major revision or reject or abstain. And you can see the large proportion of accept, which was really great to see, and some minor as well. So that was really awesome. And as a result of the feedback here, we have 2 major changes that we will talk to you about here today, but there was a bunch of minor things around clarifying things in the document just to make them clearer or better explained, or adding a little bit more explanation. There were some minor corrections, so thank you so much to everyone who identified those. They were really super useful. And we are looking at developing some supporting material for the website to give a bit more of the educational part to kind of support AUCDI. And right now, AUCDI is still on track to be published in June this year. Just a quick, I guess, overall high-level key feedback themes for each of the different data groups. This still is in progress. We aren't finished yet, but this is kind of like where we're at the moment. There was a lot of really supportive feedback. So thank you for all of that. People who acknowledged how it could be used in their current environment that they're working in and how useful all of the bits and pieces would be over time. So we really appreciated that. There was also a bit of feedback highlighting some of the terminology requirements that still need to be worked out, as well as feedback around the examples that were provided within the document. There was a bunch of feedback around adding different use cases, about questions around implementations, which we've done our best to provide answers to, as well as the usual, which is requesting additional data groups. So we've added those to our backlog if they haven't been added already. For adverse reaction risk summary, there was notes around verification status, which we'll be talking about, and developmental milestones. There was quite a lot of commentary around how did that fit with functional ability and other functional data groups, as well as the value set content, and we will also talk about this one. For functional ability, there was a lot of people providing us some sources to create the value set, which was really great because we'll start to leverage those. And there was a need or an identification of need for those additional functional data groups, which we have started at the last CDG, as well as additional data elements. The health assessment, there was a note around the need for an ability to allow recording of free text results. The implanted medical device and medical device, there was a bit of commentary about how the medical device could be used together with that implanted medical device summary. So we are looking at adding some of that in. And then around vaping summary, there was a request for additional data elements. So that's kind of some of the key feedback themes. But once we finish, we'll probably have more in-depth things that we're able to provide back. So we just wanted to talk to you about those two major changes based on the feedback that we've identified so far around the adverse risk reaction summary and the developmental milestone summary. So I might just pass to Heather now to speak about this.
Afternoon, everybody. This slide is showing some very detailed feedback from the National Allergy Council, and we've had some discussions with them around what the proposed values were and the definitions around this for verification status. Right, there's one data element in the adverse reaction risk summary, and so it's quite significant, and it is of clinical importance because the value set is something that's been adapted from the FHIR resource, and this is where we've got expert clinicians who are suggesting that, in fact, the clinical requirements need to be slightly different. So I think this is really important. If we go to the next slide, Kylene. If you want to, you can read that at your leisure, but basically they're very strongly saying that we need to revise that, and we've taken that on board, and we are proposing to we have decided that we're going to withdraw it from Release 3, and we're going to work with the National Allergy Council to develop a revised version for proposal into Release 4. So again, remembering that AUCDI is reflecting the clinical voice and the clinical requirements, and especially things that we need from a clinical safety point of view. And from the National Allergy Council's position, they're very much looking at how to make this kind of, the data sets are applicable for very precise and appropriate labelling of allergies, and making sure that we can do that well as being able to delabel existing allergies where they've been proven not to be correct. So this is a little bit simplistic for the way that they're thinking, and this is why we want to just readdress that. And I think that's worth taking a bit of extra time before we lock this into national standards. If we just move on to the next slide, this is developmental milestone summary, which again, Kylene alluded to. We got lots of feedback about this, and if this is a new data group, it's not something that we're leveraging existing content from anywhere else globally. So this is something that we've done based on our own investigations and initial discussions. And I think in retrospect, we can look back on it and say perhaps it was a little bit early for its time, because this was developed and then we followed on building the functional suite, the functional ability and some of the archetypes, some of the data groups that we're starting to build as far as a coherent group of different aspects around functional ability. And when you look back, we can see, in fact, that some of the confusion in the feedback is quite appropriate, and we haven't actually gone back and locked them all in together as a full suite. So we're going to withdraw this from release 3 again, the whole data group. And what we're going to do is we're going to work with Dr. Kim Drever and some of her colleagues to clarify the scope and purpose and make it much cleaner separation from the functional ability data group, where there seemed to be some overlap, to align it with the functional ability and also just make it quite complementary to it, but also identify other groups. So again, we're going to be building a suite, if you like, of all the different types of data related to functional ability of a child, how that relates to milestones, and then potentially how we assess childhood development. So we're looking at a bigger picture here, and I think we need to look at the whole picture before we can actually lock this particular data group in. So that's the proposal at the moment. We will work on this with Kim and come back to you with another proposal for the release 4. Thank you. I think we'll pass over to the next phase of the detailed data discussion that we've got for today, and that's with Avril.
Thanks, Heather. So with AUCDI, we're looking into R4 now, and these are the potential models that may be included in R4. Obviously, a lot of work still to be done. In our last face-to-face CDG in Hobart, obviously there was a big focus around the encounter record requirements, a few of which we'll focus on today. And then also just bearing in mind that we will have pictures and further scoping at our July face-to-face CDG. So very keen to hear what the community have to say, and maybe a good time to start thinking about that now. Next slide, please. So this is just from the Menti voting at the Hobart CDG, and we can see that there was strong support for a way to denote provisional and working status in problem diagnosis. Next slide. And so as a team, we thought quite a lot about provisional diagnosis, working diagnosis, and a lot of other different prefixes. And what we boiled down to was that a provisional diagnosis is one which is an earlier hypothesis and based on limited information. So it's about the, I guess, amount of information available, but suggests that it's not yet final. It's the best estimate diagnosis to guide early management until there's potentially something a bit more definitive. A working diagnosis is a way to signpost that this is a problem or diagnosis that the clinician is currently working on. It does guide care, but didn't really express the amount of information or evidence to support that problem diagnosis. But I think the big trouble is that a lot of us use these terms very interchangeably. And if we go to the next slide, you can see just a sample of the different values that are used in the clinical world. And you can see it's a bit of a stressed brain there, because all these values mean different things to different people. But when we analyze them in more detail, I think we worked out that there were words that expressed a level of certainty or uncertainty. There were some words which were denoting a workflow on an operational stage, and often within a more local context. There were other statuses and qualifiers which spoke about progression, trajectory, resolution, some about recurrence, relapse, remission, and then in the chronic disease context, the level of control. As well as episodes and different courses like acute, chronic, or acute on chronic. So it's a real puzzle at the moment. If we go to the next slide, we'll see if we can work through that. So within an encounter, a consumer or a patient presents with a reason for their encounter, or presenting problem, presenting complaint, or it might be that the clinicians ask the consumer or patient to come in to review them for a particular reason. And then the clinical reasoning process occurs. So the clinician gathers more subjective and objective information about or relating to the reason for encounter. And already the clinician is already thinking of a differential diagnosis list. And throughout the encounter, they gather more subjective and more objective information. It's interesting because oftentimes, even though this is what we're thinking in the back of our minds, it's not always recorded. But when we get to the part of recording our assessment in the context of SOAP, that's when we're really clinching the problem diagnosis list. And this is often the top differential diagnosis or top few differential diagnoses. And really, when we get to the point that we're having to record something, it means that we're working on it most of the time. And then, of course, for each problem or diagnosis, there's differing levels of certainty. So you might have a possible diagnosis, which is one with very limited clinical evidence at that point in time. And at the moment, there's different words used like provisional, suspected, tentative, etc., etc. As you collect more evidence towards that diagnosis, you might call it a probable diagnosis, something with substantial clinical evidence. And prefixes we might use are likely or presumed. And then hopefully, in some cases, we do collect even more evidence, and we are very confident to hang our hat on that diagnosis. And a confirmed diagnosis is one which has sufficient evidence or meets accepted diagnostic criteria, or it's confirmed based on accumulated clinical evidence. And at this point in time, we might use qualifiers like established, accepted, definitive, or final. And we'll move on to the proposal, which is on the next slide. So I've just included the concept, description, purpose, and representation there in grey. Of course, these have already been previously published in R2, so just included here for reference. But we are proposing a new data element called diagnostic certainty, defined by the level of certainty in the identification of the diagnosis, with the comment that diagnostic certainty may change over time as new evidence becomes available. We are proposing a value set of possible, a diagnosis with limited clinical evidence, probable, a diagnosis with substantial clinical evidence, and confirmed, a diagnosis with sufficient evidence to meet accepted diagnostic criteria or based on accumulated clinical evidence. And I think the confirmed definition is a little lengthier. And when we reflected on some diagnoses which are potentially more rare, or in cases where it is more criteria-based or requiring more evidence over time, for example, mental health diagnoses, we felt that inclusion of that accumulated clinical evidence was a way to kind of capture those circumstances. So we'd love to hear the group's thoughts on our proposal. We got any hands? Andrew.
Thanks, Avril, for explaining that. Sorry for being a little bit late just then. So just to recap, so is this certainty going to be referred to the problem diagnosis name at the top of this list on this slide?
Sorry, could you repeat that once more?
Is the certainty going to be about the thing at the top that says problem or diagnosis name?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. So, I mean, I wonder whether we should split I know it's already in a R2, but the problem diagnosis apart, because as you said earlier on, they're completely different. One might be a symptom or a presenting complaint, and one's actually a diagnosis. But with regard to the diagnostic certainty, what are we actually hoping to do with this information? Because in the emergency department, I can imagine that confirmed is hardly ever going to be used, and who's going to be, it just adds a cognitive sort of load to whoever's entering this data. And is it possible, is it probable, is it confirmed? I mean, what are we doing with the information? Are we going to be using this as for AI, or to try and pull out things, and we only want confirmed diagnoses, and we're going to filter out possible, or what's the point of this? I understand the theory of it, now, but what's the point of it in 5-10 years time when it's in production?
Yeah, I guess as a clinician, there's that clinical reasoning across different timelines, right? So in the emergency department, there's a snapshot when you see that person with that particular reason for encounter presenting complaint. But I guess over time, that encounter in ED, maybe multiple encounters in primary care or GP or in allied health, might actually hint towards a confirmed diagnosis later down the track. Although it's not confirmed now, it's still a possible or probable diagnosis that we're still working on.
Although there's lots of papers that show that whatever the diagnosis is, the patient's labelled with in the emergency department, regardless of whether it's right or wrong, it is typically preserved until they get discharged. So, I understand in theory it's going to be in ED, they're not going to be 100% sure, but at the end, you know, they're going to be definitely sure. But I just don't know whether it's going to be used in practice for the way it's designed for. And just while I'm talking, I think it's a good idea that we're not going to list differential diagnoses, because that will definitely start getting confusing.
Yeah,
Heather, did you want to? Sorry.
Yeah, I was just about to pass to Heather, but also differential diagnosis is potentially another model that currently exists as an archetype. So that is something we could consider exploring down the track as a complementary model to this. But yeah, certainly agree. We don't want to be listing all of the clinical reasoning of all the all of the differential diagnosis and exchanging that. Heather, did you want to say something? You're on mute at the moment.
Thank you. Yes. I think, Andrew, part of the thing is that this is a reaction, not a reaction, but this is useful in some areas where you are trying to actually go, this has met diagnostic criteria and it is confirmed, or is it the working soft diagnosis? Part of the thing is we're trying to also respond to what's currently in the fire resource for condition, which calls it verification status and simply has confirmed and unconfirmed, which I think we're trying to give a clinical reflection to that. I think there are places where you want to indicate some level of certainty. I mean, you looked at that word cloud, if you're here for that, there are a whole lot of qualifiers around diagnoses. And some are temporal, some are location specific, some are related to cancers that are not related to then chronic conditions. There's a whole lot of things and it's a mess. And so it's how do we start to tease this out, because we will need lots of qualifiers in certain situations. So in ED, maybe you don't use this, but maybe by default it becomes possible at the first level until you get more and more evidence. And the model could be extended further to start to add that level of evidence in to give levels of certainty where there is, we're always dealing with uncertainty. So how do we give some indication, in fact, we are more certain about this one, but less certain about another one? And this is not, it's not mandatory, it's optional. It's where it adds value, and it also is going to help to try and relate back to what is being done in the technical world in fire. This is an equivalent data element that we may be able to inform and shape into something that's more clinically relevant. It's up in the air, but it's starting to try and lock down qualifiers where they actually have universal applicability, optional as they are. Does that help?
The other thing to add is that sorry, Andrew, to answer your question a little bit more, just another part of it is that this was really raised in the context of an encounter record. So it is, like Heather said, it is optional, and we don't, we're not saying that you need to fill it in, but at that point in time where you are looking to transfer care or provide like a summary or a note around what happened at the encounter and where you are at when you are, handing that over, you may at that point go, we possibly think and I think Rachel was saying she often sees a question mark fracture, that kind of thing where, you are suspecting something, there's a possible fracture at this point. I haven't had a chance to confirm it yet, or I don't have a lot of evidence, like enough to say it's probable, but I can say, or, what does really that question mark mean? Does it mean possible, probable, or whatever? But at this point in time, that kind of information is currently being exchanged in referrals, in handover notes, in all sorts of places. And it is trying to start finding a way to have that as structured information. And yes, maybe AI can use it, but so can a human if we choose to fill it in like this. So kind of to that point, it came up from the Encounter kind of requirement.
Thank you for explaining that. And look, I don't want to sound like a blocker, because it actually really appeals to my sort of structured part of my brain and the way I think. But I just sort of question whether it will actually work in practice. I just, that's all as I'm saying.
I think I mean, we should always be testing this and trying to make sure that it is applicable. But I think this is trying to give something that, we had the requirements from the Encounter record discussion around provisional and sorry, what was the other one? Yeah, so that is, I think, even harder to try and standardise. So it's reflecting how solid is this diagnosis, and that's really what we're getting at, I think, when you really disentangle all of those kinds of meanings. And so this is just trying to give one way for us to start to establish in a fairly consistent way that there is some certainty around it, but totally optional. And I think if we get value out of AI, and unless we've got this kind of clinical thinking and the decision making, we're not going to be able to use AI at scale. So whether it gets used or not, it's a possibility. The better that data foundation is, the more we can start to scale those kinds of things. Tony, you are next. You're on mute, Tony.
Tony, you're on mute if you're talking to us right now.
Yeah, maybe we move on to Maya until Tony can work it out. Maya?
Oh, hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Oh, fab. I don't think you guys have met me. This might be the first time I've ever been brave enough to speak. I'm the National Medical Director at Silver Chain, so national home and aged care community-based organisation, but my background is an emergency physician, as well as in the EPIC environment is where my recent experience of a problem list comes from. I would say two pieces of feedback. The first one is a problem list is super helpful, especially where it gives you the opportunity to document what the problem was from a client's perspective and the progression of evidence accumulation towards either a confirmed diagnosis or an active issue. I think the idea of diagnosis versus problem, as highlighted already, is really important. People have problems. We frame it as diagnosis, but they have problems. And then having some way to track the progress of that problem over time and the pieces of evidence that link towards it or investigations that have been negative so that we don't repeat them is really, really valuable, especially if it crosses years and you're looking for an easy way to summarise that client journey and all of the different people that have had input into it. As already highlighted, though, where it falls down is nobody uses it. My experience of this in EPIC is that the way clinicians are used to documenting is they like free text and they will write hashtag chronic pain and all of the different things and continue to cut and paste it. So unless you have a forcing function that requires a problem list, all of that rich value and idea that we're discussing is lost in implementation and nobody does it. And the reason why I find that really difficult is if, for example, in a hospital environment, you are looking at someone who's breathless and you wonder out loud, I wonder if this is a PE. And then nobody tracks that, nobody's accountable to it, and nobody is following up. It gets buried. And so having a problem list that says, I've got shortness of breath, I wonder what this is, allows you to track that over time and not miss the PE, because somebody who comes along behind you will say, oh, did we deal with that shortness of breath problem? I wonder what my insight could be here and what value I could add. And when it's buried in free text, we don't bring that to light, and none of us have a shared opportunity to solve the problem or investigate for issues. It's just that in my experience, these problem lists are not used. They would be extremely valuable. I absolutely think that all of us would value, especially where the client journey is now more likely to be across more fragmented, siloed parts of the system. And if we could do that across all of us, gosh, wouldn't that be lovely? The questions that you have to answer is how are you going to force it to be used? Who's going to be accountable for reconciling it? because over 10 years, that problem list might be 20 things long. And how are you going to reconcile off the things that are resolved or no longer a problem? And who's going to be responsible for the problem list? That's the bit that I can't quite understand.
I think we are all on that page here. I think that's what we're all really, really passionate about. And I think this is us building the data block so that there is something to enforce or to adhere to, or, you know, with different vendors or being engaged in different ways to kind of work towards a common standard. And so totally hear your points and totally like agree with all of the benefits and all of the things that need to be worked through over time, particularly around the implementation space. And so for us, really focusing where we're focusing our efforts right now is actually agreeing what that standard data model is, particularly with the problem diagnosis. Well, in this case, the problem diagnosis one. So we agree with, you know, all of the things you were saying. And I think this group here is particularly passionate about getting that structured standard data right. And then, you know, working with, and we do have a technical stream where we work with a lot of the different vendors, and there are some vendors on the call listening right now who are, you know, looking at how do they start to move forward towards these standards as well. So yes, definitely that. And then, yeah, so I think.
Yeah, I think what we're thinking about here is obviously making sure that in the data models that we have the elements available to be able to support the implementation so that you can build the workflows appropriately. So thinking about making sure that we know that this is the kind of information that we do want to capture as structured information. And so we have that available in the data model to be recorded against in a structured way. But then obviously the complexities of the clinical workflow and the implementation requirements and everything around that need to also come into it. And so that's where, yeah, these things all need to sort of make sense and play together.
And we're working with our partners. So this program is a partnership with the Digital Health Agency, the Department of Health, Disability, Ageing, as well as HL7, trying to bring all those pieces together.
Yeah.
Cool. So Tony, have you been able to make your microphone work? No. Okay. All right. I might move on to Chris Pierce.
God, it's a really interesting discussion, actually.
Oh, wrong Chris, but we'll go to Chris.
I'll leave the other Chris. So let the other Chris go.
Okay, sorry, Chris Pierce.
Yeah, thanks. Look, yeah, too many Chris's, Chris.
That's right.
Look, I think this is a proposal that needs a lot more work done on it. What are the actual clinical scenarios in which it's going to be used? Because I think it's one that could be fraught with a lot of problems, in part because, you know, for instance, I think if you were going to use this in mental health, well, there's no such thing as diagnostic certainty in a lot of ways. And I think in the setting of rural GPs getting, is it uncertain simply because we haven't been able to organise the test yet? Is it uncertain because it is forever going to be uncertain? And there are diseases, for instance, such as lupus, for which there is always some variability in whether or not it's the accurate diagnosis. And then there's the issue of receiving some information that says that this is a uncertain diagnosis and what one makes of that. So I understand the premise, but I think it just needs a lot more work on the actual clinical scenarios with clinical examples as to how it should be used.
Okay.
Chris, I'm kind of curious though. We know that like mental health may not have strict diagnostic criteria in the same way as diabetes or something like that, but that's why it's also around accumulated clinical evidence. You get more and more certainty to say, I think this is a good, this is the right working diagnosis. I mean, that's what you're trying to do all the time, isn't it? You're trying to establish a working diagnosis that you use to treat and use as the basis for testing and revisions and prevention and all sorts of things. It triggers a whole lot of things. And just having some sense of it's certain or not certain is helping to establish the approach to that kind of thing. So I'd love to know what you would propose instead of it. I guess that's the thing, because I think there are a whole lot of other qualifiers that will help other things become more clear. But I think certainty is one axis, and there are lots of other axes that are qualifiers for particular diagnosis in particular situations. And we've been doing that work. You saw the word cloud. There's a whole
no, I think you're misunderstanding the point I'm trying to make. Almost without a doubt, every diagnosis can be challenged at any point in time in the presence of new information.
Yes.
Right? That's a clinical reality. So what I'm saying is that what we should have is some clinical. So I'm saying that's a different concept to what this is trying to do, right? This is trying to say that there is a piece of work around a diagnosis for a patient of which there is yet more work to do until we can confirm that they have SLE or even, that their abdominal pain is cholelithiasis, right? So what I'm saying is we need some constraining clinical scenarios. Otherwise, some clinicians will be saying, this diagnosis is this diagnosis is uncertain as yet, and will, remain that way for some time, whereas others will apply a degree of certainty to a diagnosis because the diagnosis is in their mind certain, even though it actually needs more work. So I'm not saying that the concept of is bad. What I'm saying is it needs to have some constraining information around when and where it is used to guide who's going to use it. I think the ED thing is a rip snorter. Sometimes we send people in ID and we know it's pulmonary embolus because we've done the thing, and that's fine. But other times it is not, and it's certainly that diagnosis does stick through in the clinical record.
So
that's all I'm saying. Not the Pringles concept's a problem, just it needs constraint.
So what I'm hearing, though, is you're describing things around the temporal certainty, that over time, this is an initial one, this is where we've had more time until, theoretically we get to a final diagnosis. It's about the process or the diagnostic investigation. And that is another axis that we could be putting in here as a qualifier to be able to say this is an early one or this is an advanced diagnosis, but this is still our level of certainty. And I think they're still mutually exclusive axes, but they both complementary about how you might, in certain diagnoses, need one versus the other. I think I
stick to my point. We're talking about thousands of clinicians across the country having access to this as a piece of the data model.
Yeah.
And I don't disagree with what you're saying. I'm just saying that unless it is clear and constrained, there'll be a lot of rubbish data in this particular piece.
I think that's a really good point, and I think that's what we're trying to do with this one axis. Carleen, I wonder if it's just worth showing that mind map that we've got in the background of the slide deck, just to show that we have been investigating this, Chris. There's been a lot of work done internationally with OpenAIRE around this. So it's the hidden mind map that's the next one, I think, after this.
Slide 20.
It hasn't got it hasn't got the links, but this on the left-hand side is what's in FHIR at the moment and the current verification status and clinical status. And you can see there's a whole lot of qualifiers: active, inactive, confirmed, unconfirmed, provisional, differential, remission, resolved. I mean, there's all these things, and they were part of what was on Avril's word cloud. On the right-hand side are the qualifiers that have been identified in OpenAIRE with different axes, trying to establish the difference between certainty, the status of preliminary working established, refuted, for example, those kinds of things. I think they're all part of the picture that we have to try and tease out. The one that's most standardizable to me is the certainty. The rest, I think, are still pretty messy and do need lots more investigation, but it's not clear how to do that. We need a process to do it.
I think to your point, Chris, we'll with all of our data models that sit in AUCDI, we do provide guidance around the use and misuse of a whole bunch of different things, and maybe we can draft those up and bring them back and see if that is sufficient to kind of flesh it out if it isn't clear.
Yeah, to clarify some of that, the clinical scenarios and the use and misuse.
Yeah. So we might take that on notice, Chris, and I might, if that's okay, and I might go back to Chris Moy because you had your hand up before and then it got confused. Chris Moy, did you have a question still?
I was just going to say this is a really interesting discussion. And I think the points that were made in the chat, one was by Rachel about trying to sort of use this to try and reduce the free text because then people use possible instead of question mark. And the second point was Maya, which I thought was really interesting about using this from a temporal point of view to be able to, number one, be able to split a presenting symptom into diagnostic differential diagnoses, and in fact to be able to knock them out as you go along, and which is a fascinating way to do it. The flip side of that is the concern that we don't make that this has to be optional, and that it cannot be intrusive. And while encouraging change management in the way we'd like to in the long term, we can't force change management, because if we do that, we are going to make enemies as fast as you can, very, very fast. So certainly as long as it's optional, that's fine, because what we do want is actually to have this available as an optional thing and encourage it so that people do use this instead of putting a question mark as a differential diagnosis. But people ultimately, it's not going to change. Andrew was right. People are still going to put the presenting symptom as shortness of breath. Okay. What we'd love to be able to get to is not to have somebody put query PE because they've done a freehand, because that's no good for anybody. What we want to do is get them to put PE possible, and maybe CCF possible, left ventricular failure possible, and infective exacerbation COAD possible, and then knock them out as you go along. But we can't have it that the ED doctor is forced down a line unless it's really, because if you make them do more tick boxes, we're going to create hell for them, and we're going to create enemies very fast. So I think it's going to be this tight line, and the key thing you said here at the start was that this has to be optional and it can't be intrusive, but we should be trying to encourage change management so we get away from free text, and we can start to use it for better stuff where we can actually use it from a temporal differential diagnosis potentially, but also be able to increase, be able to have temporally be able to increase the certainty of diagnosis as you go along, which is what Maya was saying, which I thought was really, really interesting points. Anyway, that'd be my thoughts anyway.
Thanks, Chris. Definitely the devil's in the implementation, I think. Heather, were you going to say something else?
I think it really is, if we don't have something there, then people are going to use free text. They're going to put it in comments. They're going to, how do we start to do this sensibly? And I guess that's what we're grappling with. It's not that it's perfect. And I think there are all sorts of other ways to add flavors, if you like, and things that we can use for clinical decision support, for AI, those kinds of things. It's about getting that data right, but not being intrusive. But if we don't have it there, we can't start to use it. And so it's a little bit of, there's a tension. There's certainly a tension. But other people are saying we need this. Other people say we don't want it. And I think it's going to be use case driven, and it should only be there where it's relevant and helpful. And that's the optional side of it. Yeah.
Thanks. Rachel?
Oops, if you press the right button. Sorry, folks. It's a fascinating discussion, and just thinking through some of the things that people have said, Chris Pierce's concern about rubbish data. We've already got rubbish data in lots of medical records because of this question mark, suspected personal use of language to denote one clinician's thought about whether it is or isn't. But if we're really going to support clinical handover and patients who might be in the throes of having something confirmed, if we had had this from the outset, arguably people wouldn't be using question marks at all. But I do hear that there's probably different use case scenarios in primary care, in the GP workflow. Maybe the use is more likely than in other sectors. But The other thing I wanted to mention, just for you to have in your mind, in your thinking, and Heather's probably all over this anyway, is that in the primary care world, there is a relationship in the software between the reason for visit, the reason for medicine, and the diagnosis. And often in some of the systems, you only put one of those in and it automatically puts that term in all 3 locations. So just having that in the back of your mind is does this make that easier or harder? Is it a moot point? I haven't really thought it through, but I think the workflow is slightly different in the primary care clinical systems because of the way that they operate. And I just wanted that considered, really. But I think it's a good move forward. But I also think, looking at that hidden slide that you had up just now, being really clear which category is for which. I can't remember what the one was, but the difference between diagnostic status and diagnostic certainty needs to be really clear for people to, you know, when are you using one versus the other. And there was another question in the chat about active or inactive, you know, being really clear, when does each of those apply, in what scenario, so that we still have a move towards high quality data, which is actually what we all want at the end of the day, so we can share meaningful information easily and seamlessly with others.
Thanks, Rachel. I find that diagnostic status tricky, and we're not proposing it because it is something, you know, we've alluded to that in the intro to this, proposing this data element, in that it is temporal. It's often related to one particular organisation or one particular location or one particular clinician. It's not relevant to others, whereas the certainty is something that's potentially should be exchanged. So, you know, what I'm proposing up on that mind map is what's the clinical feedback we've had, but I'm not convinced to propose the other ones for AECDI at this point. I don't think they're safe, and I think they need a huge amount of discussion in comparison, but I guess it's all relative as the discussion is revealing.
Thanks,
Rachel. Thanks for everyone in the chat. We will go back and have a look at it. There was one question though from Chris: how will diagnostic certainty work with active status? Just wondering if resolved needed to be considered for inclusion in diagnostic certainty.
We have a look at the mind map. I think resolved fits into another axis is probably the short answer there. So it's in that resolution phase, including, you know, gets into relapsed and resolving. And I think this, again, I'm not going to die on this hill about this particular value set that's in there at the moment, but it's something that needs to be teased out. But I think it's an orthogonal axis basically, and it's another qualifier that we could have sitting. They need to be mutually exclusive so that you can have one or the other, or there are rules that if it's inactive, then none of these things are really applicable anymore, is potentially the thing. And we already have active and inactive in the problem diagnosis data group. So yes, they do need to all work together. But there's almost like an implementation rules that will need to work alongside this. This is the data definitions. There's another layer where we would need to explain to the implementers how these might work when one becomes invalid in a certain situation, if there's another qualifier, etc. That's another a layer of information as we start to go down this list and perhaps include more.
Cool. Thanks, Heather, and some other comments in there. Thanks, Charlotte, and some others around, you know, the value from, or like the possible using it in the allied health space, as well as the importance to consumers. I think a few people have popped some stuff in there, which has been great. Some comments around, you know, using AI now to kind of help fill in some of that data. Was there any other comments, or questions that people wanted to raise around this proposal for diagnostic certainty? Andrew.
Just risk of going round in circles. Does anybody know of anywhere where this is done well? Because what I fear that we want this because we want the data quality to be good, but my fear is that nobody will ever go back and change it from probable to confirmed, or nobody, in the same way as nobody ever updates a problem list and says this is resolved and this isn't resolved, and this is active and this is inactive. Nobody ever does that, and we see it in all the EMRs, whether it's in a hospital or GP land or allied health. No, I mean, does anybody see this working well at scale? And I know there's going to be particular individuals that Avril and Kim have said they do, but where it works well across the whole system, because that's what I would really love this to work. I just don't know whether anybody will ever reconcile properly. And I'm sorry if I'm being a dreadful pessimist.
You are, but you're keeping us honest here. I mean, I think you're right. Maybe they won't, and current practice is what it is. And maybe it's change management. Maybe if we can show that this will provide value in the future. But it's like if we don't build this up to be models that we think are what clinicians should have in practice, even if it's in outlier situations or just pediatrics or what Avril's doing, you know, there are use cases where it's going to add value. Maybe it's going to take time for this to do. It's not a reason not to do it.
No, I agree. But I mean, even places like Estonia or Catalonia, are they doing this well, or is anywhere else doing it well?
Are you talking about this level of detail, or are you talking about?
Yes, yeah.
I don't know where this is used elsewhere, but if we're not putting it into our models and proposing it as our foundation for how we think a diagnosis could be ideally described, then it's never going to get used anyway. So it's
no,
like,
you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
I don't know. I've got no guarantees, and I haven't got the crystal ball to say it'll work.
No. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Maya?
I think there's two separate bits, isn't there? There's the does it work now? Definitely not. Does it exist now? Yes, it does. Could it work in the future with new tools? And I think the AI conversation is a really valuable one. Like what we're saying is the human doesn't do it. It's a failure point and it's never going to happen, mostly because we're not resourced time-wise to go back and reconcile somebody else's suggested diagnosis and to make sure that the right data has been linked in there, that the data linkage journey and the reconciliation piece does not currently happen. That doesn't mean that it isn't going to be possible into the future and that the data isn't useful. And if we could make it work, geez, it would be valuable.
Thank you.
Thanks, Maya. Rachel.
I think I've just written it in chat for you, actually. I was just answering Andrew's question, even within a single workflow, within the GP workflow. You know, if you had good write back ability, if the data could flow seamlessly both ways, if you're writing a care plan or a referral on the fly and you realize the problem list is wrong, you've currently got to go back to the problem list, you've got to edit the problem list, you've got to start all over again. They could edit that, change it on the fly, update what's in the medical record. It would make the process so much easier for the clinician. And it would also mean that they get better information exchanged with everybody else. So I do think that there is a good opportunity for it to work even within one isolated system that supports better sharing of better quality data with other people. Just my 2 pennies.
Thanks, Rachel. So I'm really curious to see where people are at. Shall we do a vote and to see how people are feeling about this? So we did prepare a Menti to add the new problem diagnosis data element of diagnostic certainty. If you were able to, if I can get the QR thingy to come up, otherwise go to menti.com. Why can't I? You'll have to go to menti.com and enter the code 81602922. Maddie's also popped those details in. Oh, here we go. There we go. There's a QR code there as well. Be really interested to see where people are feeling. If you have voted minor changes, please pop them in the chat so we can look back and understand what your reasoning was. If you disagree, please also please pop that in the chat as well. We are interested in understanding that to make sure, what we're designing is fit for purpose.
And Maya's put a vote in the chat as well.
Oh, thank you. Andrew, you have your hand up. Is that a old one or a new one?
Sorry, that's an old one. Sorry.
Okay, cool. Thank you. We definitely will go back through the chat and pull out some things from there. So please don't think that they'll be lost.
Thanks for your consideration, everyone. I think this notion of like the clinical certainty or uncertainty, how we actually document uncertainty in all sorts of things as far as clinicians. It's very easy to do observations and test results and those kinds of things in our system, but that stuff in between, where we're actually recording some of that nuance of what we're doing and thinking and what's going on in our minds as we make decisions, is not well done. And I think this is uncomfortable because we're starting on that journey. And that's what we're starting to bring into these kinds of discussions. And it's quite reasonable that this is an uncomfortable discussion.
So how many have I got? So we've got 27 people. I think maybe we might leave it there. Looks like most people are supportive. With no changes, where there's minor changes, please pop in there. I did note some comments around having those examples or just like how it could be used would be useful. So we'll keep that in mind as we move forward. But I might move on to the next thing.
Hi, thanks, Kylene. Hi, everybody. So one of the other things that we've got on the agenda that's been sort of a frequent flyer across the CDGs more recently has been this idea around how do we capture family history data. And so we know that we can use it in an encounter record or to complement assessments or to support problem diagnosis tracing across generations. But how do we actually want to record that? And one of the things that we've been exploring is how it's actually recorded. So most systems we know will often put in family history data in like a free text field or in a Boolean situation. And it's commonly used to screen patients for those hereditary risks of diseases or conditions. However, we know that we also want to have a broader application of this data. So we want to be able to include non-genetic family members, behavioural factors where alcoholism or interpersonal violence or tobacco smoking is relevant, or environmental toxins. Next slide, please. So we did a little bit of research, and the example you can see on the slide here is an example of a family health tree that the WA government have published that's available online. And you can see how they're sort of trying to put together the family members, their conditions, their ages, their date of births, and the kind of data that they're wanting to capture. So, as I mentioned before, primarily it focuses on the key chronic conditions like hypertension, hypercholesteremia, CVAs, mental illness, but it also extends or can extend to include those genetic predispositions and social behaviours or other family history related data. So next slide, please. So on the slide now, for those who are new, we're going to walk through the text that's in the orange box. This is our current proposal for a family history summary. We need to note that it's different to a family history questionnaire. So we're not trying to record a yes-no Boolean type situation. What we're actually trying to do is get a summary information about the health of family members and all of the family members over time. So the purpose is to record that information about the health and family members that can inform the assessment of health risk for the individual. And so we would record one instance of this data group within a health record, and any changes or updates over time are captured as revisions to the original entry rather than creating a new entry. So for those who are familiar with AUCDI, this is not an uncommon representation for summaries. This is similar to the evaluation models in OpenAIRE. And if you could just click the next slide, please, Kylene. And we've just got a special note in the bottom of the orange section, which is just about the scope of the data group. So I'm not sure if that's big enough for everybody to see, but the model underneath outlines all of the data elements that we're proposing to include in the family history summary data group. At the top, we've got an overall narrative summary of the health of the family members, which is just a narrative free text field. And then we have the option of including per family member. So this is optional repeating. So we can capture all of the family members and we can capture them by name, or we can give them an alias, for example, their relationship to the individual whose health record this actually is. And we can also record their vital status, which we are proposing a value set around, is that family member actually living, deceased, or unknown to the clinician who's completing the information. So it's the status of the family member indicating if they're alive or dead at the time of recording. Then we can also then capture another optional repeating node that sits nested within the family member itself, which is giving that richness around the actual problem or diagnosis that was of the cause or that is the subject of concern. So we've got a problem diagnosis name, a clinical description, an age at onset, and whether or not this actually contributed to that member's death. So we've got a value set there as direct cause or closely related, unrelated, or indeterminate. Now, in similar models, we've proposed a protocol at the bottom, which is the last updated, so we can actually record when this data group was updated. So we can actually gradually grow the family member history over time. And if you just click the next slide, please, Kylene. We've got a note just at the top there, which we have the option of recording the family member's name as it is, or we can record an alias. So we can provide a unique identifier for a family member. So both are optional, an optional single instance, but we need at least one to be recorded for each given use case. So at this point, I was just wondering if anyone has any thoughts or feedback around this proposal.
There's been a bit of chatter in the chat.
Yeah,
it's a bit noisy where I am, so I'm sorry if I'm making a racket, but I'm just curious.
That's okay, Pip.
I think this does seem to me to be something that would be great to have for consumers and families to fill in. I was just having a quick look at the Rare Voices Australia website, which has some resources around, family trees. I was just wondering if there's been any thinking about those sorts of approaches.
In terms of the family tree structure, or in terms of the family tree per family member and per condition?
I'd have to, I'm afraid I'd have to have a closer look. I'm so sorry, because
okay.
I hadn't really thought ahead too much about it, but I just know they will have done some really detailed thinking about how people put together family trees.
Oh, that'd be great. If you could share that link, that'd be great, Pip. Yeah, so this would also support things like pedigrees when you're doing them. There's a great RACGP resource that was published in 2023, which is the second edition of the Genomics in Practice. And that's actually got a whole section in there about family history data and what needs to be recorded. So I mean, this model supports most of what their needs are to record in that situation. And I know the WHO have done a lot of research into family history. So a lot of it is mapping directly across, and remembering that this is just a starting point. We're not proposing this as the full model. We actually do have a roadmap as well to share with you, where we can show where the model will go or could go. But yeah, is there any other information? So I think you can see that, is it Chris, you've got some feedback there around family reproductive health history, and if that would be in scope? Yep, I think it would.
Right.
Okay.
There's a lot of stuff in the chat. Just trying to
There's
track
a
back
lot.
if there's anything to. But does anyone have any questions? Oh, Kim.
So I was trying to see if I could get a snapshot of a family tree that I had to draw today. It's a complete mess. But I see siblings, and I will take a history from the mum about what's happened. And it's important that it is that who's giving the information, because the mum will know a lot about her own family and what's, the children that she's given birth to. She'll have a view and have limited information about dad's. And so that's important. And then when I've got that, just that to begin with, then I would like to then put that, and this is a future state thing, put that into the other siblings with a summary of what I know about the girl that I was speaking about. So I actually had this issue before I came on. So I was taking this big history. I was seeing the older sister and the younger sister. There is a genetic condition that the mum has, cardiomyopathy, autosomal dominant, which is found. But one of the girls I see has a genetic condition for separate, doesn't share that one that the mother has, but does have a genetic problem that gives rise to her neurodiversity. And so what I asked the scribe to do was like, just give me the family history as best you can. And then what I can do is copy and paste it, right? But I also will always say, this is what mum said, and this is, how she got there. So 2 questions, like, one, who's giving this information, and then with what sort of, I guess that frames what certainty. And then the other one is, can it, in a future state, would it be something that you can point to and draw down on,
Yeah. So it's really about the validity of the information supplier, really, is what you're looking at, and
years.
And their experience.
Yeah, because I've looked after kids in home care, out of home care, and there'll be multiple children, often multiple partners. There'll be different combinations of this and that, and the history of either parent biologically is not often confirmed for a couple of years, and so I can see this can be revised, etc. So that was my other question. Certainty, I suppose. So I've got a child that I saw. I swear to God, she must be, fetal alcohol syndrome disorder. I thought it was, but we couldn't actually confirm it. It took us 5 years to confirm it. And then her sibling, by the time who was younger, the mum was not drinking for that child, and so again that took a while to sort through and kind of put in there. But anyway, it's that type of thing.
So are you wanting certainty to be added to the model as well, Kim? Sorry, just to clarify.
But I, given the conversation we've just had about certainty.
Kim, what about source? Was that, like, you kind of mentioned
information
source,
source?
because then you made that judgment based on, because if it was about the grandmother on the father's side, but it was the mother's side who was telling you, like, maybe you'd be like, are you so sure, or vice versa?
Okay, so exactly. So I could actually put up that case if I could find it, but source is important, and also certainty. So the mother's telling me about what she knows of her genetic condition, and I've actually I can see that result. She shared it with me. She starts talking about her sister who recently had the assessment, like a genetic thing, and she was cleared. Her brother has not had the assessment because he's about to retire and doesn't want to lose his, insurance or something. But his daughter, so the mum's, has just presented to the emergency department yesterday in VT. So it looks like she's got it. So dad probably has it. So the certainty looks like it, but and I'll put it down today as probably, but we won't be able to confirm until we have medical, I suppose, black and white, yes, they've got that condition.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
it's that.
Yeah. So maybe that's something we can put on the backlog for consideration, because I'm not sure if that's on the roadmap. And if it's not on the roadmap, we can put it in the backlog for consideration and thought. I think for now, I suppose there is a comment field that you are able to put additional information if you need, but we can look at how might a source and a certainty type element fit into this as well in the future. Would that be okay?
Yep. That'd be great. And do you want to have a quick look at the roadmap? Shall we jump to the next slide so you can all have a squiz at? So on this slide, you can see we've got the roadmap outlined, and at the top there, just under the overall description, we've got per problem, which again is optional repeating. So if we only are looking at or concentrating on the problem itself, and we just want to know, has any member of your family ever had diabetes? We can put in that diagnosis, a description, the problem details, and the impact. They're all future candidates at the moment. And, sorry, Andrew, have you got a question?
I was just asking, is this likely to be a sort of living document so that it can be revisited and filled in as different sort of encounters come and cross different family? I mean, that's difficult, crossing different people, but it would obviously work best if you could link it with all the different family members.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, it is. If we go back to that, the representation, so the slide before had, so it is one instance within a health record that gets updated with any changes over time as revisions to the original health record are made. So, yep, you're exactly right.
Sorry,
it becomes a living thing. Yep. Yep. So sorry, if I just jump back to the roadmap again, we were just going through that. So you can see that the node that's sitting in the middle of the slide there, which is per family member, has a few other elements in there. So there's family member details, biological sex, a relationship degree, which is how distant that particular person is from the individual whose health record it is, a family line, a date of birth, and then we've got some options down the bottom to include biomarkers, biomarker descriptions and biomarker details, and a multimedia data element right at the bottom. So the scope of the data group is quite broad. We're trying to capture all the necessary information to record, and again, it's an evaluation, so it's about pulling all of that information and data together in one clinical concept. And yeah.
So are there any other questions just to see where people are feeling as a starting point, knowing that it can additional things can be added? So noting Kim's request around source and certainty for the backlog for consideration. I might switch over to no further hands. So I'm curious to see where people are sitting on adding a data group, family history, to AUCDI to make it available in AUCDI as a first step. So I'm curious to see where people are. Again, if you have any notes for us around changes you would like or reasons for disagreeing, please pop them in the chat. There's quite a lot of people noting minor changes, so if we could get a little bit of detail in the chat, and if someone puts something and you agree with it, you can also just put a thumbs up. It's fallen off the page, I can't see it. Oh, the source, okay. So people really like the idea of having a source.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
And I think we've also got a hand up, Kylene. Laura.
Yes, Laura.
Laura, yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
I've finally made one of these meetings, but I made it to Sparks in Hobart, which was my first kind of interaction. But I just wanted to raise about the provenance. So I think the source is really key, but just understanding if there's going to be multiple people contributing to this over the time, I think it's understanding where each of those elements came from will be really key. but the
Okay.
concept itself is a good idea. It's just the provenance. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay.
When you
great.
say this provenance in that sense, it's because is it where it came from, like whose record, like is it Kim's record of this patient versus I don't know, Heather's or Avril, like is it where it came from, like from a technical sense, or is
it the person entering it in the system? You want to know that it was a different clinician entering different pieces of information, or both?
Yeah, or both.
I think both of those are key to explore. I'm not
Yeah.
going to give a definite answer on which way, but I think we need to explore how that would work.
Yeah,
Just
and I
so
think
you could
that
trace back to who originally
That's great.
entered it into the system, but also then if it's going to be broader than that, I think it's key to understand that too. So
yeah, and I think
both
that
great
kind of
points.
that idea is there around patient summary and all. Anytime where multiple sources are coming together to
Mhm.
generate one summary or one, unified source of data, knowing the provenance of each individual part of the data has definitely come up in discussion.
And I think some aspects of that actually sit more with the technical implementation side of things, where it's around that auditability and who's in the system and that kind of stuff. Whereas, some of the other provenance around the source of the information is more what we're capturing in the clinical requirements. But
but definitely for consideration.
For sure.
Thank you. Sorry, no.
I was just going to say welcome to her first CDG.
Online.
The online one. Yeah.
So
thank
I
you.
do see some notes in there around the source of family history that's of interest, as well as look at that rare voices. So we'll definitely have a look at that too. All right. Well, it looks like I think we finished voting. So we'll note those and have a look. And if we need to bring back, we can come back. So I think that kind of brings us to the end of the meeting. So in terms of next steps, we, as Heather mentioned earlier, we will bring back data groups to support those developmental milestones and that developmental information. So we will continue to work offline with Kim and some of her colleagues and whoever else is interested, and bring it back to the CDG for discussion as per usual into the normal workflow. The other thing I just wanted to highlight is we are looking at pregnancy care state. So Heather did a bit of a teaser a couple of CDGs ago, but we haven't actually progressed that. But we are working on a discussion paper that we do want to circulate before the next CDG so that we can discuss it with a little bit more kind of in depth. So we are looking to propose something in August. So we will have something out at least a couple of weeks before that August meeting, so people can have a read, have a think about it, and bring their thoughts, because I think it is a bit of a discussion as it is something a little bit new. Heather, was there anything you wanted to add there?
No. Well, I mean, this is, again, it's going to be a little bit challenging potentially because it's looking at how we manage pregnancy quite differently to the way we've traditionally done it and what is currently in the International Patient Summary. But what we're trying to do is actually have a way to record, and it was a bit like what Avril was explaining. There's a lot of stuff that clinicians do in their heads. It's in our background. We're always vigilant for, is this woman pregnant? How is she trying to get pregnant? Is she on IVF, which might trigger a different care pathway? We're doing that kind of stuff innately, implicitly, but we don't document it. So this is a way to start to document it. And Andrew's point before, if we want to do AI, we need this kind of background to help us to do it. It's absolutely making it explicit what clinicians just do naturally, but it's about vigilance, and that's where sometimes we slip up. This will help us to try and document it and help to, I guess, share this kind of information about what pregnancy precautions or what pregnancy care is appropriate for this particular person at this time. So that's the tricky bit that we're trying to get our head around here, and to try and share it and bring you on that journey to see if you think that's worthwhile.
Cool. Thanks, Heather. So yeah, those are our kind of next steps for the next few months. Upcoming event, so May face-to-face 27th is the CDG in Brisbane. Vicky, I think it's the VOCO, is that right? The VOCO?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, but please double check the Eventbrite because I could have it wrong. So it'll be the 27th. And then June, we'll be publishing AUCDI R3, but we won't have a CDG meeting. And then our next face-to-face after that will be in July, and I think that's going to be Melbourne at this point in time, but we will have more details soon that we will share. And as Avril mentioned in the beginning, we will be including an AUCDI R4 scoping. So if there are particular data groups or data elements that are of interest, start having a think, and we'll put out an EOI like we did for R3 as well. Oh gosh, yes, good question, Mel. I don't know yet. I haven't thought about the wardrobe that I'll need. It's so cold down there. Other events, Digital Health Fest is coming up. Will be around. HIC will also be at, as well as the SOMED Business Meetings and Expo in October later this year, which will be really exciting. As an international conference, we will be looking to showcase Sparked and all the work that you guys have done. And so we're really interested to kind of show the world what we're doing and what this group has done. So thank you guys so much for your input. And I think that brings us to the end of the meeting. Thank you guys so much for your input. We will be, as I said, we will go through the chat. I know you guys have put a lot of effort into putting a whole bunch of information in there, so we will kind of take that and fold that into the things that we're doing. So thank you all so much. We finished early for the first time ever, and we'll see you either at the face-to-face, otherwise we'll see you at the next CDG. Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. See ya.